Hay sent the termination notice by text message. Not a letter, not a certified document. A text message, sent at 6:43 in the evening on a Friday in December, from a number I had saved in my phone as Lakeview Board President, that said the Lakeview Shores HOA Board had voted to terminate our snow removal services effective immediately and thanked us for our years of service and wished us well in our future endeavors. That was the entire message. No cited reason. No performance documentation. No contract reference. No notice period despite the 60-day termination clause in our signed agreement. A text message at 6:43 on a Friday, 3 weeks before the storm system that the National Weather Service would later describe as the most significant winter weather event in the Great Lakes region in 14 years. My name is Petra Vazic. I am 46 years old. I came to the United States from Croatia in 1998 with $200, a work visa, and a certification in heavy equipment operation that I had earned at 19, because my uncle had told me that people who could move things with machines would always find work. He was right. I have been operating snow removal equipment in Lake County, Illinois, for 23 years. I built my company, Vazic Winter Services, from one used truck in 2004 to a fleet of 7 pieces of equipment, 12 seasonal employees, and 22 private contracts covering residential developments, commercial properties, and 1 municipal auxiliary designation that I had held for 8 years. I know Lake County whether the way someone knows a difficult relative. Completely, specifically, and without illusions about its capacity for sudden changes in temperament. When Lakeview Shores HOA terminated my company's contract by text message on a Friday evening in December, I made 3 decisions before I went to bed that night. The first was to call my attorney in the morning. The second was to document everything I had from the previous 3 years of that contract, in case the documentation became relevant. The third was to check the extended forecast. The extended forecast showed a major system developing over Canada that was tracking toward the Great Lakes with the specific trajectory that lake effect amplification turns from a significant storm into something that requires a different category of language. I went to bed knowing what was coming. I do not think the board president of Lakeview Shores HOA checked the extended forecast that night. I think if she had, she might have sent a different message. Comment below where you are watching from. Because this story ends with a blizzard, a contract that was violated rather than terminated, a board president who made 14 calls I documented without answering, and a forensic accounting of the Lakeview Shores HOA financial records that had nothing to do with snow removal, and everything to do with why my contract was terminated by text message on a Friday evening 3 weeks before the worst storm in 14 years. Lakeview Shores is a 93-home development on the western shore of Lake County, Illinois, built between 2005 and 2013 on terrain that sits directly in the path of every system that comes off Lake Michigan and that receives, on average, 68 inches of snow annually, with the specific variability that lake effect produces. Meaning some years are 42 inches and some years are 94. And the difference between those years is not evenly distributed across the season, but arrives in concentrated events that test infrastructure and service providers in ways that averages do not capture. I had won the Lakeview Shores contract in my 3rd year of operation, 2007, through a competitive bid process administered by the HOA management company. The contract covered 1.6 miles of interior roads, the main entrance road, 2 visitor parking areas, and 6 pedestrian path connections. Annual contract value had grown from $44,000 in 2007 to $68,000 in the current year as the property had expanded and my scope had grown. I had held the contract for 16 years without a termination notice, without a formal complaint, without a single event where I had not met the response time and clearing standards specified in the contract. The Lakeview Shores HOA board had changed composition several times across 16 years. The current board had been in place for 18 months. The president was a woman named Sylvia Crane, 57, who had retired from a position in commercial property management and had approached the HOA president role with the professional confidence of someone accustomed to making vendor decisions from a position of authority. I had met Sylvia once, at the start of the current season, when she had requested a meeting to discuss service standards. The meeting had been cordial. She had asked several questions about my crew's certifications, my equipment maintenance schedule, and my response protocols. I had answered all of them with the documentation to support my answers. She had said the board was committed to ensuring Lakeview Shores received the highest quality services. I had said I was committed to providing them. The meeting had ended without any expressed concern. The first indication that something had changed was a written notice in November citing what it called inadequate clearing depth on the pedestrian path connections following a 6-inch event in the third week of November. The notice had been prepared by the HOA management coordinator, a man named Devin Marsh, who had joined the management company 2 months earlier. I had responded within 24 hours with crew logs, GPS route data, and photographs showing path condition after the event. The paths had been cleared to the standards specified in the contract. My response included a section-by-section analysis matching the contract specification to my crew's performance documentation. No response to my response came. The second notice arrived in December. It cited response time on a December event as 12 minutes beyond the contractual window. I had responded with my dispatch log, which showed a response time of 43 minutes on a contract that specified a 45-minute maximum. The 12-minute discrepancy was not a discrepancy at all. It was a misreading of either the log or the contract. I explained this in my response with the specific times and the specific contract language. Devin Marsh sent back a one-line message saying the board would review my response. The board had not communicated further when the text message arrived on Friday evening. I looked at the text for a long time after I received it. Then I looked at the 60-day termination clause in my contract, which required written notice of termination 60 days in advance, except in cases of material breach, and specified that material breach required documented performance failure on 3 or more events within a single season, following written notice and opportunity to cure. I had received 2 notices. Both had been contested with documentation supporting my performance. Neither had been followed by a response from the board. Material breach had not been established under any reasonable reading of the contract. The text message was not a valid termination. It was an attempted termination that violated the contract's termination provisions. I saved the text. I photographed my phone screen showing the sender, the time, and the content. I sent it to myself by email with a timestamp. Then I made myself a cup of tea and looked at the extended forecast for 45 minutes. The system tracking toward the Great Lakes was deepening. Lake effect amplification projections had been updated upward. The preliminary accumulation forecast for Lake County was 28 to 36 inches over 48 hours with potential for isolated totals above 40 in the highest accumulation bands. The event was projected to begin in 18 days. I went to bed. Saturday morning, I called my attorney. Her name was Marta Pellick, and she had been practicing commercial contract law in Lake County for 20 years. She was also Croatian-American, which was not why I had retained her, but it was why our first conversation in 2009 had gone on longer than a standard attorney intake meeting. I told her about the text message. I read it to her. She asked about the contract termination provisions. I read them to her. She was quiet for a moment. Petra, she said, this text is not a valid termination notice. The contract requires written notice with 60 days advance, and the text does not meet the written notice standard for a formal contract termination, and certainly does not meet the material breach standard. I said I knew that. She said, what do you want to do? I said I wanted to document the breach of the termination provision, preserve my right to the remaining contract value, and understand why a board that had never expressed a performance concern in 16 years had sent a termination text on a Friday evening 3 weeks before what was going to be the largest storm in 14 years. She said, You think there is something else going on. I said I had looked up the HOA management company that Devin Marsh worked for, a company called Premier Ridge Management, in the Illinois Secretary of State Business Registry. She said, and I said Premier Ridge Management had been incorporated in September, 4 months ago, the same month Devin Marsh had started as the management coordinator for Lakeview Shores. She said, who owns it? I said the registry listed Devin Marsh as the sole member. She said, the management coordinator who has been issuing performance notices against your contract owns the management company that was hired to replace the previous management company. I said that was what the registry showed. And I said, I do not know yet who is going to replace my snow removal contract, but I would expect it to be a company with a similar ownership structure. She said, you have been watching this develop. I said I had noticed the pattern when the second performance notice arrived on a contract I had held without issue for 16 years, and that the pattern had clarified when I looked up Premier Ridge Management. She said, Petra, if there is a replacement contractor in place, it is going to become visible very quickly given what the weather is about to do. I said yes. She said, I am going to send a formal response to the text termination on Monday stating that the purported termination is invalid under the contract terms and that your company considers the contract to be in force. That puts them on notice of the breach and preserves your claim. I said, send it. She sent it Monday morning, certified mail and email, addressed to Sylvia Crane as board president and to Devin Marsh at the management company address. The letter was 4 paragraphs. It cited the specific termination provision. It noted that the text message did not constitute valid written notice. It noted that no material breach had been established under the contract's breach and cure provisions. It stated that Vasic Winter Services considered the contract to be in force and stood ready to perform under its terms, and it requested confirmation within 5 business days that the board agreed the contract was in force, or, in the alternative, a written explanation of the legal basis on which the board believed the text termination was valid. Devin Marsh responded on Wednesday by email. His response did not address the contract language. It said the board had made its decision and that Vasic Winter Services should consider the contract terminated and that any further service on the property would not be authorized and would not be compensated. He did not cite a legal basis. He did not address the 60-day provision. He did not address the material breach standard. He sent a response that ignored every legal question Marta had raised and restated the termination, as though stating it again made it valid. Marta sent me his response with a single note. He does not understand contract law or he does not care. Either way, the documentation is getting stronger. I spent the following week completing my documentation package, every crew log from the current season, every GPS route record, every photograph I had of completed events, every response to the 2 performance notices with the timestamps showing my response times, the contract document, the text message, Devin Marsh's email response, the Premier Ridge Management Registry search, and one additional item I had found on Thursday when I looked at Lakeview Shores HOA's publicly available financial records, which Illinois HOA statute required to be made available to current contractors with active service agreements. The financial records showed a new line item in the current season's expense ledger. Management Services, Premier Ridge Management LLC, $1,800 monthly. The previous management company had charged $1,400 monthly. Premier Ridge, Devin Marsh's company, was charging $400 more per month for the same administrative functions on a 93-household HOA. Across a full year, that was $4,800 more than the previous arrangement, paid to the management coordinator who had issued 2 unsubstantiated performance notices and sent a contract-violating termination text. I put it in the folder. The storm was now 11 days away. The replacement contractor became visible on the following Monday when a truck I did not recognize drove the Lakeview Shores interior roads. I was not at Lakeview Shores. I was at another contracted property 2 miles away. A former Lakeview Shores resident who still had friends in the development sent me a photograph of the truck with the company name on the door. The company was called Lakeshore Clear, LLC. I searched the Illinois Secretary of State Registry that evening. Lakeshore Clear LLC had been incorporated in October, 6 weeks ago. Its registered agent was the same commercial registered agent service that Premier Ridge Management used. Its member of record was Devin Marsh. He owned the snow removal company that had been given my contract. He had manufactured performance documentation to create grounds for terminating my 16-year relationship with Lakeview Shores, sent an invalid termination text on a Friday evening, and awarded the replacement contract to his own company without disclosing his ownership to the board. The management coordinator, who was supposed to act in the HOA's interest, had used his position to direct business to himself while billing the HOA premium management fees through his separately owned management company. I called Marta with the registry findings. She said, "This is the same structure we have seen in other cases. Self-dealing through related entities without disclosure. The fraud is against the HOA, not just against you." "I know," I said. "Sylvia Crane does not know Devin Marsh owns Lakeshore Clear." "Almost certainly not." She said, "This changes the litigation strategy. The HOA is a victim here as much as you are. If we approach this correctly, the board becomes an ally rather than an adversary once they understand what Devin has done." I said, "I want to wait until after the storm." She said, "Why?" I said, "Because the storm is going to demonstrate something that documentation alone does not demonstrate as clearly. It is going to show what Lakeshore Clear is capable of on this property in a major event, and it is going to create the circumstances under which Sylvia Crane and the board understand what they lost when they sent that text message." She said, "You are letting the situation develop." I said I was letting the facts accumulate. The facts being both the evidence in the folder and the operational reality that a company incorporated 6 weeks ago with no history on this property was going to face a 40-inch blizzard in 11 days. She said, "Petra, make sure your equipment is ready and your crew is available. Even if you do not use them at Lakeview Shores during the storm, you want them available." I said they were always available. That was the point of running a professional operation for 23 years. Marta sent a second letter to Sylvia Crane and Devin Marsh on Wednesday. This letter went further than the first. It disclosed what we had found about Devin Marsh's ownership of Lakeshore Clear and the premium billing through Premier Ridge Management. It stated that Vasic Winter Services was prepared to file a civil complaint for wrongful contract termination and breach of contract, but that we were willing to discuss resolution before filing if the board was interested in understanding the full situation. The letter suggested that the board might wish to obtain independent legal advice before responding. It gave a 5-day response window. Devin Marsh called Marta within 4 hours of the letter's delivery. She said he was not calm. He said the allegations were false and defamatory and that he was consulting his attorney. She said she looked forward to his attorney's contact and ended the call. Sylvia Crane called me directly the following morning. She had read Marta's letter. Her voice had the specific quality of someone who has been told something they are still processing. She said, "Petra, I want to ask you directly. Did Devin tell you why he recommended terminating your contract?" I said Devin had cited 2 performance notices that I had contested with documentation supporting my performance. I said I had received no response to either of my documented responses. She said, "He told the board your performance had declined significantly and that he had identified a qualified replacement at a lower cost." I said Lakeshore Clear LLC had been incorporated 6 weeks ago and was owned by Devin Marsh, the same person who had recommended terminating my contract. There was silence on the line for a long time. Then she said, "Devin owns the replacement company." "Yes," I said. "I sent you the registry documentation in Marta's letter." She said, "I have not read the attachments yet." I said, "The registry shows Devin Marsh as the sole member of Lakeshore Clear LLC, incorporated October 15th. I have the filing date and registration number in the letter." She said she would read it immediately. Then she said, "Petra, if this is accurate, the board was not aware of this relationship. I said I believed that. She said, "What do you need from us?" I said I needed the board to understand what had happened before the storm arrived, because the storm was 6 days away and Lakeshore Clear had never plowed Lakeview Shores in a major event. She said she understood the urgency. She said she would convene an emergency board meeting that evening. The emergency board meeting produced the outcome that a board produces when it understands it has been defrauded by the person it trusted to manage its operations. Devin Marsh was terminated from the management coordinator position that evening. Lakeshore Clear's contract was suspended pending review. The board authorized Marta to share our documentation with the Illinois Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. And Sylvia Crane called me at 9:15 that evening and asked if Vasic Winter Services was available to resume service at Lakeview Shores effective immediately. I said we were. She said, "The board wants to resolve the contract termination dispute and reinstate your contract. What do you need?" I said I needed the invalid termination formally rescinded in writing, my contract reinstated for the remainder of the season, and the following season with a price adjustment to reflect the current market rate, reimbursement of my attorney fees to date, and a conversation about the financial irregularities I had found in the HOA records related to the Premier Ridge Management billing. She said she would discuss all of it with the board's newly retained attorney and get back to me. The board's attorney called Marta the next morning and said the board was prepared to accept all 4 conditions and to cooperate fully with any regulatory investigation of Devin Marsh's conduct. The formal reinstatement agreement was signed on Thursday. The storm arrived on Saturday. The storm was everything the 14-day forecast had suggested it would be. It arrived Saturday afternoon with the specific seriousness of a system that has gathered energy across 400 miles of open water and has no interest in being modest about what it carries. By midnight Saturday, 19 inches. By Sunday morning, 31. Wind at 38 gusts, lake effect bands cycling through with the irregular rhythm that lake proximity produces, meaning accumulation was not steady but came in pulses that required adaptive management rather than a fixed schedule. My crew was on site at Lakeview Shores from Saturday at 2 in the afternoon, when the first significant accumulation began, until Monday at 6 in the morning, when the system finally moved east and the accumulation stopped at 43 inches total. We ran in 3 shifts, 7 pieces of equipment, 12 crew members rotating through rest periods. I was on site for 29 of the 39 hours, managing the grade-specific approaches, the drainage ditch margins, the pedestrian paths that ice differently than the road surfaces, the visitor parking areas where the drainage patterns create specific accumulation problems that I had learned across 16 winters at that property. Sylvia Crane came out Sunday morning during a brief lull in the heaviest accumulation. She was bundled in a coat that suggested she had not expected to be outside in this. She stood at the main entrance and watched my crew work for a few minutes. Then she came to my truck. She said, "Petra, how did you know this was coming when you made the reinstatement conditions?" I said the extended forecast had been available for 12 days before I made the conditions. She said we did not look at the extended forecast. I said most people do not. She said Devin's company, Lakeshore Clear, would they have been able to handle this? I thought about a company incorporated 6 weeks ago, run by a management coordinator whose professional background was in property administration rather than snow removal operations, with no history on a property whose grade changes and drainage patterns and accumulation behaviors had taken me 4 years to fully understand. I said no. She looked at the crew working the second interior road grade, the approach that had taken me 2 full seasons to learn the correct blade angle for, the one where a new operator would go in straight and find out why that was the wrong choice within the first pass. She said 16 years. I said yes. She said Devin was here for 10 weeks. I said yes. She went back inside. The storm total at Lakeview Shores was 41 inches. We cleared the last pass at 6:03 Monday morning. Every road, every path, every parking area. The grade changes managed correctly. The drainage ditches clear. The salt application timed for the post-storm refreeze that lake effect events produce in the 24 hours after the main system passes. I drove out through the main entrance and watched the gate close behind me in the early morning light that comes after a major storm when the sky is still gray, but the air has gone still, and the snow is the particular brilliant white of new accumulation before anyone has driven on it. Marta filed the civil complaint the following week. We filed against Devon Marsh individually for fraud, self-dealing without disclosure, and tortious interference with business relationships. We filed against Premier Ridge Management for the excess management fees. We filed against Lakeshore Clear for unfair competition through undisclosed conflicts of interest. The HOA, represented by its new attorney, filed a parallel complaint against Devon Marsh for breach of fiduciary duty and recovery of the premium management fees. The cases were heard together by Judge Patricia Yown in Lake County Circuit Court. The documentary record was complete. The registry filings, the performance notices and my documented responses, the text message termination, Devon Marsh's email response that had ignored the contract questions, the financial records showing the Premier Ridge billing, the timeline establishing that Premier Ridge and Lakeshore Clear had both been incorporated within weeks of Devon Marsh's arrival as management coordinator. Marta had organized the documentation chronologically and by category with an index that Judge Yown later described, in the context of ruling on an evidentiary motion, as thorough. Devon Marsh retained an attorney who mounted a defense centered on the argument that his ownership of the related entities had been an oversight, that he had intended to disclose it but had not done so in the urgency of the transition to his new role, and that the performance notices against my contract had reflected genuine concerns that had been independently assessed. The independent assessment argument collapsed in discovery when the board members who had received Devon's performance recommendations testified that they had been based entirely on Devon's verbal characterizations, with no independent observation of my crew's performance and no independent review of my performance documentation. The oversight argument for non-disclosure collapsed when Marta produced Devon's calendar records, obtained in discovery, showing that he had scheduled meetings with both his entity's other clients during the same weeks he was issuing performance notices against my contract. He had been actively developing his competing businesses while managing the HOA that was paying him to act in its interest. The judgment was entered in April. Devon Marsh was ordered to pay Vasic Winter Services $61,000 representing the wrongful termination damages, the contract value for the period between the text termination and the reinstatement, and attorney fees under Illinois statute. He was ordered to pay Lakeview Shores HOA $38,000 representing the premium management fees, and the excess Lakeshore Clear contract costs the HOA had incurred during the period between my termination and my reinstatement. His Illinois Property Management Coordinator certification was referred to the State Licensing Board, which conducted its own disciplinary proceeding and suspended his certification for 3 years. The referral to the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division produced a separate enforcement action that resulted in a consent order requiring Devon to disgorge the management fees he had received and to refrain from property management activity in Illinois for 5 years. Lakeshore Clear was dissolved before judgment. Its equipment had been leased rather than owned, and the leases were returned. Premier Ridge Management was dissolved in May. The combined judgment and enforcement recovery was $91,000. The HOA's share was returned to their reserve fund, which had been drawn down by Devon's excess billing. The reserve was restored to the level it had been at before his arrival. Sylvia Crane called me in May with the outcome of the disciplinary proceedings. She said, "Petra, I want to say something I should have said before the storm and before the lawsuit." I said she did not need to. She said, "I do need to." I accepted a management coordinator's recommendation to terminate a 16-year service relationship without reviewing the performance documentation myself, without speaking to you, and without asking any questions that would have revealed what Devon was doing. A text message at 6:43 on a Friday evening. I said, Sylvia, Devon was very careful about what he showed you and very careful about what he did not. She said, that is true, but I was not careful enough about what I asked to see. I said the board is asking the right questions now. She said, we are. We have a disclosure policy for every vendor and every management relationship. We review performance documentation ourselves before any contract action. We have a homeowner oversight committee with access to financial records. I said that is the right structure. She said, Petra, will you stay with us? I said, 16 years is a long time. I know the property. She said, we know that now. I said, I will stay. I am running a route in Lakeview Shores today. The grade on the second interior road approach. I have been managing that grade for 16 years. I know exactly what it does in the first 24 hours after a lake effect event when the temperature drops below 20 and the drainage refreeze begins. I know which parking area fills first in a northwest wind, and which pedestrian path ices before the road surface does, and which section of the main entrance needs the heaviest salt application to stay clear through the overnight. That knowledge took 16 years to build. It is not available in a registry filing. It is not something a company incorporated in October can possess in December. When Sylvia Crane sent me the reinstatement letter, she said something in the final paragraph that I have kept. She said, Vasic Winter Services has served this community with expertise and integrity that we did not adequately value until we were in danger of losing it. We will not make that mistake again. I folded the letter and put it in the file folder I had labeled Lakeview Shores documentation from the evening I first received the text message. The folder had served its purpose. The documentation was complete. The storm had come and gone. The road was clear. Everything exactly where it was supposed to be, which is where it had been for 16 years because someone had taken the time to learn it completely and had kept records of everything they learned. Hit the like button if you believe that 16 years of expertise is worth more than 6 weeks of a corporate registry filing. Subscribe for more stories about people who documented everything before they needed it and were ready when the moment came. And if you know someone whose long-standing service relationship with an HOA has suddenly produced unexplained performance concerns, send them this. Because sometimes the question is not what the performance notices say. It is what the business registry says about who wrote them.